You're listening to The Dating Den with dating and relationship badass and best-selling author Marni Battista. Every week, you'll get the raw truth from top experts and real people on the important dating, sex, and relationship issues you want to know about. So if you're ready for true talk that's authentic and unfiltered, and you're not afraid to be called out on your stuff, then you're ready for what's next.
The Dating Den with Krister Ungerböck. How to talk to men. Simple shifts that help you be seen, heard, and valued. Ladies, before we get started, I have a complimentary gift I'm so excited to share with you. If you have ever second-guessed yourself with men, and I know you have, and you wish someone, or you wish I would just tell you what to say to get a guy to ask you out, or to take the relationship from casual to committed, or you want to, get your needs met, get what you want, but you don't want to sound pushy or push him away. Go right now to datingdenvip.com and you can download my top 5 dating scripts men are powerless to resist. The truth is, knowing what to say and how to say it can be the only thing standing between you and a super great guy. So go to datingdenvip.com right now and grab your complimentary copy while it's still available. That's datingdenvip.com. Ladies, welcome into the Dating Den. I am so excited to be here. And actually, it's kind of crazy. I've been recording episodes, living life in my RV. Now I'm back selling my house, getting crazy ready to begin the next chapter of my life as an empty nester. And I was so excited when I was prepping for this interview with Krister Ungerböck. You're going to love him. Because my husband and I, living in 36 feet for 5 weeks, really had to work a lot on communication and leadership and relationships. And so I was like, I'm going to ask him some questions. This is going to be great. So let me tell you a little bit about Krister. I told him I wish we were on video because he's got like these super cool glasses. He's wearing like this amazing like power pink shirt. Super cool guy. I love what Krister does. He says, we're in a communication crisis and most of us don't even realize how bad it is. We confuse sent and received. Our words and approach create a massive drag on business success, relationships, communities. In fact, when I think about the work that I do, most often people ask me, what should I say? So he's like perfect for our crew. Meanwhile, all of us are like looking for change. We're trying to get a competitive advantage. And what he says is the answer we've been seeking is inside us right now. It's simple, it's fast, it's free. He's the #1 Wall Street Journal best-selling author, a battle-tested CEO, which makes me smile, a leadership language expert, and he has developed the highly effective talk shift system, simple changes and adjustments that will elevate your communication, increase morale, your performance, and your growth. And people who use this system have better relationships, whether it's at work and at home, faster growth, a stronger competitive advantage, boosting performance. And he's going to talk to us about how to integrate that, what it means, what is talk shift. He's working on a project called Relationship. I mean, there's a lot to cover here, today's episode. So I'm so happy you're here, Krister.
I am so glad to be here. And you're telling me about like your listeners before we kind of hit record. I was like, those are like 80-90% of the types of people who read the talk shifts and really kind of rave about it is professional women who also want to improve their relationships outside of work, and both with their children, with their parents, and with their spouses or whoever they're dating. And so it's I'm really excited to be here, even more excited than I was an hour ago.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. And when I said I spent 36 feet living with my husband for 5 weeks, you smiled. And so I'm glad it amused. I'm glad it made you smile.
First of all, living with your spouse in 36 feet is living with your spouse in 35 feet.
You did it in 35 feet?
No.
I was like, yeah, well.
Just a bad joke.
Oh, so. No. Okay. I was like, really? Because, I did live with my husband in 23 feet for 2 weeks. And that we were like, no, we need a bigger vehicle.
Yeah.
So, all right. So I want to just get right to it because if you can tell our listeners, just so they have some context about what exactly is talk shift, and an example, and how does it really impact your ability to be a leader and have better relationships?
So what I was looking for, so the genesis was 5 or 6 years ago. I left my role as a CEO, and I kind of walked out on my identity as a CEO of a big company. And then 2 weeks later, my wife walked out on me. And I'd read tons of books about leadership, communication, business. I mean, certainly within the thousands, because I started reading business books when I was 12. And so I thought I was a good leader, but here I was like, well, no one is following me. My business partners don't want to work with me. My wife doesn't want to follow. And I use the word follow in the sense that I think that I was looking for what's a kind of the common thread of what is leadership in relationship, regardless of whether that relationship is in a work relationship or in a personal relationship. And because I was with my business partners for 20, 25 years. And what I really noticed is that the communication and what destroys a business relationship at the highest levels of an organization, that really starts to resemble a marriage, because like the people were like super committed. Like the pain of leaving that business relationship where we were all shareholders together is like, it's it comes close to the pain of leaving a marital relationship when you have children. And so I was like, there's got to be a common thread here. And so I went on this kind of walkabout, if you will, for 3 to 5 years. I hired a bunch of different people. I basically said I'd read all these business books, and I threw out all the business books, and I was like, I'm going to surround myself with all those people I would have judged as weird or far out back when I was a CEO. And now today you're in California. Now I just call those people from California,
Right.
And many of them were from California, I was always had my CEO business hat on, like, what can I take away from this that could be applied both in a context of business relationship or personal relationship. And then because I was a software engineer when I was young, I think that men tend to gravitate more towards this. Like I think women do as well, but I wanted like really specific phrases, like, here's a different way of saying something. And I always look for ways that I was saying things like, oh, wow, I had no idea. There were some things that I thought I was actually behaving in an emotionally intelligent way because of the words that I used. And what I realized on this journey is that actually, like, my words were actually getting in the way. And so the ultimate kind of like big idea that I realized is that, often we're in a frustrating relationship at work or at home, and we think the other person needs to change, or we need to change our personality. And then the big insight was that we don't need to really change people. We just need to change our words, and the people will follow.
That's deep. I mean, because I think what's really interesting is like so many of our listeners are, let's just say, control freaks or recovering control freaks, right? And so that's the whole thing. We go in there and we feel unsafe in a relationship, right? Which is what gets our defense system up. And then we react, and then all the information that we know, right, because we've read all the books, right, kind of goes away. And what happens, I think, is that our intention doesn't make the impact that we want, right? Because most people don't start out saying, like, I want to be a dick, right, or I want to be a bitch, or I don't want, they want to do the right thing. So when you look at like the core of the words that you choose, and I know you said this comes from like 500,000 data points, right, that are like helping to identify what are the exact words and language. Tell me, like, what did the data show you, and what did it end up looking like in terms of the actual words and things that you're doing?
So I guess the journey started where I was kind of looking for these tools, right? And then when I created the tools, because I'm a CEO and business owner, I was like, well, we need to kind of get some kind of data to see whether that actually works. So we created this thing called the Talk Shift Profile. And what we found is people who scored in the top 25% of the quiz actually were twice as likely to have no frustrating relationships in their life than the people who scored in the bottom 50%. And so my real goal was to transform 100 million marriages, leaders, and lives.
Wow.
And
that's so cool. So let me ask you this. So when you think about the miscommunication around the words we use and, people hearing what we're actually saying, what makes language powerful? Like, what is the difference in the words that are impactful in a positive way and the way that we typically just talk to people? What are the differences?
Honestly, I think it's just the words. I mean, of course, you can take the right tools and you can use the wrong tone and things like that to maybe make the tools less effective. But I honestly, from what I've seen, is that often what trips us up is just little subtle changes to our words.
Give me an example, because I know that I was doing some research. There was 2 questions, like if you start your questions with what and how.
Yes, I mean, that's one of the simple examples. Like, we can say, well, in a business context, you can say, hey, did you call the customer yet? Like, or did you do this yet? Like, we're just giving them a solution disguised as a question, which usually doesn't work very well.
Right.
Or I could say, what do you suggest to do next? Or how do you plan to solve the problem? And we start to have different kinds of conversations when we simply make that one simple change. Now, that's one of the simplest, most straightforward kind of talk shifts in the book. One of the things I think is find that readers are most commonly citing is the 5th one, which we may actually move in the next edition to be the first one. But it's called On a Scale of 1 to 10. And so if you imagine, like, if you ask your spouse, like, hey, how happy are you with our marriage or our relationship? Like, are you happy with our relationship? Or even if you say, are you happy with our communication, which would be more likely to get an honest answer. The real answer, there's only one positive answer to that is
yes.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Right. Well, so the reality is so by taking this alternative, saying on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you with our relationship? But we actually take it and we exaggerate the scale. We say, how on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being like we have a better relationship than anyone we know, like better than the movies, like basically than anyone we know or we've ever heard about. And 1 being we have a worse relationship, worse than the movies, worse than anyone we know. Where are we on that? And what that does is exaggerating the scale. Like somebody could say 7 or even a 6 on that scale. And that like opens up some honesty, like, oh, right. Wow, not a 9, we're not an 8. Like we got some work to do. And then the follow-up question is, well, what's the difference between a 7 and a 9 for you? What can we start doing? What can we stop doing to be the difference between a 7 and a 9? So we basically bring it back to behavior. So this is one of the examples of the talk shift, which is 3 components. There's 1 question, we exaggerate the scale, and then the third is the follow-up question that actually moves us to a different thing. And what we find is that usually when relationships break, it's actually because of an unspoken secret. And that unspoken secret might be that I've been unhappy with my relationship for the last 5 years. I just haven't really told you how unhappy I am.
Right.
And so by having different communication tools to help us have more honest conversations, and I think that one of the things we did in the 2nd edition, which is probably going to be on Amazon within the next 2 months or so, is we added a new preface, and the title is Leadership in Relationship, because many people who were buying the book, we have actually like 70, 80-year-old women who are buying the book, and that we started to get some people who were saying, well, hey, why is this a business book? I thought this was going to help me in my relationships. And that's because the first couple chapters do have a lot of business examples before we get into the relationship examples. But so we added this new preface called Leadership in Relationships to help people see the connection between what is leadership in a business and leadership in a relationship. And I think many people kind of say like, well, as a boss, like a boss has a certain, I can't say things to my boss because there's, like a fear that I'll get fired.
Right.
But I could say things in my marriage or whatever, in a relationship. And what I think people don't see is that the common thread here, well, there's 2 common threads that ultimately leadership, whether it's personal or professional leadership, is about creating commitment. In a business context, we call it employee engagement, right? I want engaged employees, committed employees, but I don't think it's a coincidence that the word that we use before we get married, we get engaged, is the same thing as employee engagement, because our role as leaders in a relationship or in a team or in a business is to create commitment. And we do that through our communication. And then the other thing that we found is that the parallel that people typically don't see between leading in a context of and why these tools work across both contexts is, if a boss says, hey, how happy are you with your job? Or sorry, are you happy with your job here? Again, versus on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you with your job? I won't go into the tool, how it can be applied there, but what we're doing is we're creating safety, because like if someone says, if I'm in a multiple wage, a dual income family, right?
Right.
The reality is the fear associated with saying, no, I'm not happy in this marriage. If that begins a conversation about divorce, like I may never be able to live the financial, the comfortable lifestyle if I'm divorced. So I have fear.
Right.
And it's even more exaggerated if I'm taking care of the children and I don't have an income. Like, how would I ever live that? So there's a financial fear.
Right.
It's no different from the fear that I would have of getting fired from my job. In fact, I would say it's even more, because to replace a double income lifestyle versus just get a new job, is actually even more serious. So what happens is this fear that shuts down and creates silence, and I call it the fear-fueled silence. That causes us to just stop talking about the things that we need to be clear about in order to kind of make our relationships better. But then I think what often happens, and this is when I think this is more of the dynamic between men and women, is I think regardless of whether there's wage disparity in the household, I think women often don't realize that, especially for men, there are other ways to create fear, like, that have kind of, there's a financial power that people have in a relationship,
right?
Personally, professional, but there's also emotional power. Like men tend to thrive upon the approval and encouragement of their female spouses.
Right.
So when women criticize and don't give men that kind of positive encouragement, there's an equal emotional power that women maybe don't realize that they hold over the men in their lives. And so ultimately, that was kind of why we wanted to get that point across, to understand these tools are tools to kind of resolve some of those imbalances with communication.
Wow, like I just had to take down like 10 notes because everything you said is so amazing. And I'm going to start with the last one and hope that I can get to all of them. So this is a really interesting thing. I think that women don't understand how much it impacts someone they're dating or in a relationship with, or someone they work with, when their language is critical rather than question asking or giving feedback or actually getting to the root of the actual problem. So I really want to highlight that. So when you said that people have healthier relationships with commitment, it sounds to me too that when you, and as an example, that ranking question, the follow-up questions, you're also establishing trust, right? Mm-hmm. And so what I hear you saying is that when you are looking at these subtle changes, you're helping to vanish fear by using words that make it safe, so then you can create trust with the person that you're interacting with. So can you kind of talk about why trust is important, how these shifts create that trust so that you can actually deal with the problems rather than just continue to Band-Aid it?
Well, I think that the trust is the first step to establishing the trust, is having these conversations in a way that that it doesn't go sideways, right?
Right.
Is because we need to. Many therapists say, like, most marriages end in not violence but in silence, right? Mm-hmm. And so, it was interesting. A lot of the research shows that most people who leave a relationship, and at least in marriage context, women tend to leave twice as frequently as men. That's the research is clear on that. Is they typically decided to leave years before the moment they actually told their partner that they want to leave. And so usually by the time we get to this point of actually having open conversation, if it really is to save a relationship, it's almost like the person who wants to leave first has to say, well, I need to give this a real chance. Like, even though I've decided like 2-3 years from now, but like that other person, this is partly what happened in my marriage, is that my wife had decided years before, 5, 6, 7 years before. And then when it finally broke, it was like, well, hold on. I didn't realize that this was actually a problem.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's just about having honesty and having the conversation about what's going on is probably the most important. But then it's also about creating safety. Like, hey, we're going to work on this for some period of time, not forever, but creating safety so that people are actually able to not go into kind of fear where they're thinking. Because what happens, I think especially for women, is like, in many relationships, women will criticize someone.
Yep.
And men do a lot of things wrong too. So I'm not like,
yes,
we're not absolving. In fact, actually, the research by Dr. John Gottman is very clear he had I'm going to get the quote almost exactly wrong. But his quote was based upon his decades of research into relationships that the fundamental determinant of whether a relationship succeeds or fails is the man's communication.
I think that's so huge. Well, so I love the work of the Gottmans, by the way. And I always talk on the show about 69% of a couple's problems are perpetual, meaning that they'll be having those conversations about the same things over and over again. And so what I love about this is saying that we have to understand that if we don't deliver the message in a healthy way, you're setting your guy up to basically fail and respond wrong, right? Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah, well, so here's what happens. Like, so I see more because I'm a software engineer. I see communication, how it goes in cycles. Like, it's, we say garbage in, garbage out. You have bad input. So the criticism starts, and this can happen on either way, like the man or the woman.
Yeah.
It's more concerning when it starts from the woman because of what happens next. So over some period of time, man starts to disengage. Like, I don't want the nagging wife or whatever. I'm just going to be silent. I'm not going to stand up. Like, when I'm angry, I'm just going to do whatever, she says, like they say, happy wife, happy life. If I just put my down. But then what happens is then many women conclude, oh, here I am. I want a real man, not somebody who has no backbone. I want somebody to stand up to me. Like, well, it's not necessarily, I feel like I'm somebody who has a pretty strong backbone, but in my marriage, I was just the one that went along like, okay, I'm going to go. And so what happens is, men do it in different ways, but we create our own cycle that feeds such that 5-6 years later, it's like, well, this is just not someone I want to be with because I want somebody who actually behaves like a real man. And what happens is, unfortunately, men like me often get out of their first marriage because someone else leaves them. We start reverse engineering. What the hell did we do wrong?
Right.
There are like number of books out there. Like, there's one called No More Mr. Nice Guy. And every guy that I've ever read this is like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what happened. I was just trying to be nice. And then my wife lost respect for me because she felt that I didn't have a backbone. Yeah.
And I think this is such a huge thing. I when you talked about the cycle, so I think this is really interesting. Gosh, I could talk to you for hours. I'm just realizing. I'm curious what you think, like, if you were going to like reverse engineer this or figure out what's a better way to do it. So here's one thing I learned in my 5-week experiment with my husband. So and it was funny, like, this pattern was so specific that when he said it to me, I actually thought he was joking. I thought he was spoofing himself because it was so predictable. Okay, so we're driving. So let me paint the picture, people. We're driving in a bus, basically. It's like this 36-foot big ass thing. Like, he's in the captain's seat, I'm in the passenger seat, and he's driving and he's navigating, and there's like always like a challenge. And so he'd be like, simple thing. Can you pour my coffee from my, like, my work, those mugs, those thermoses that people used to take to work back in the day before coffee machines? He'd be like, can you pour the coffee in my mug? And I would say, yes. And I'd grab it. And then he'd say, do you know how to do it? And then I'd say, yes. And then he'd say, watch out for that because it will spill. And then like 10 seconds later, be like, let me just do it. Right? It was like, but that whole thing takes like maybe like 8 seconds, maybe 10 seconds for the whole thing. So I'm like, so my reaction ultimately, like, before I sort of got like conscious about it, was like, I'll just say no. When he says, will you help me with my coffee? I'll just say no, because he's going to end up doing it anyway. Right? So if you were going to say, like, what are some talk shifts that we could implement, just because it's a simple thing and it's not like a huge part, but it was like, like it's a problem that is a funny thing about like asking for help and control. It can be a big thing in a relationship. So I'm curious, what talk shifts could we have applied in that situation? What would you say?
So if this is a recurring pattern, then there's one little nugget that's only like probably 3 sentences tucked into one of the larger talk shifts that is about labeling the pattern. And then coming up with, because it's about being playful about it. So like, like, let's say you're like, hey, this is the 4th time you've asked me. So like, can I like, can we call that? Like, just give it a name. What would you call it if you're like going to make it like a playful, funny, like that playbook? What's
I would call it the I want help, but I don't.
So like, then I'd like make it kind of like funny, like the helpy trick.
Yeah, I love it.
Just a help me trick again. Yeah, like whatever. Just come up with something fun and playful. And so like, hey, and then we agree, like, hey, whenever you do the help me trick, is it okay? We're asking for permission. Would you be open? So this is a yes, no question, but we're gonna say, would you be open if I say help me, and you're like, oh, there I do it again. And like you give him something that really frustrates him, be like, hey, well, let's come up with something that I do that really frustrates you. Or you could say on the scale of 1 to 10, how open would you be if I say help me? And like we just kind of laugh about it. So I did this with my wife, my second wife. And it was, what was that? It was happened not too long ago, but she said, do you notice that so it was Friday night, we're having some wine. And she goes, do you think I'm dumb? And so one thing I did notice over the journey of writing the talk shifts is like after a couple glasses of wine, if someone asks you, do you think I'm dumb? This is not the right time to have the conversation.
Exactly.
That's the wrong context.
I'm just laughing because like, first of all, I want to go out to dinner. My husband and I should go out to dinner with you and your wife because I think we'd laugh a lot. But that's exactly it. I wanted to say to him, like, do you think I don't know how to fucking pour coffee in a moving vehicle? Okay, so I feel your wife right now. So tell me what happened.
So I circled back the next day and say, hey, when you said that, like, what was it? She goes, well, do you realize that you ask, does that make sense a lot?
Ah.
And so I was like, oh, yeah. Like when I was in like 22 years old, one of my first mentors, because I was in technology, he'd be like, you're in a meeting and you're talking about some IPEC profile, like, blah, blah, blah. He goes, so when you're in the meeting and there's not technical people in the room, just ask, does that make sense? So it's just had become a habit. And so the interesting thing, so we had been dating for like probably 18 months. We were not yet married yet. And I said, okay, so whenever I do that again, just because it's a habit. It's like I'm unaware of when I do it.
Right.
It has nothing to do with whether I think it's just a habit. So you just kind of look at me and be like, Krister, that does make sense. And let's count it off and let's see how frequently it happens. Because I agree, I probably do it more frequently than I think. So literally, like we were still dating, like we have kids half and half custody, so we wouldn't even see each other every day. Within 1 week, we're walking and she goes, 34.
That's amazing.
Just to like, and like, I'm like this. So we're bringing awareness to the habit in a playful way.
Yep.
But then there's another aspect of this is that, so imagine this habit had gone unchecked for another 10, 5, years or whatever. Like she's a career woman, like many, like, she's very successful, makes, an amazing compensation working for a big tech company. And she started to wonder whether I thought she was not smart.
Right.
Because of this repetitive pattern of communication that was just because some mentor told me at age 22 or 23, just make sure you ask people, does that make sense? And so this is how sometimes really subtle, innocuous, like not even intentional things can erode a relationship or can erode someone's self-esteem in a relationship over time. And I'm so thankful that we caught it.
Yeah.
And we caught it because we used the tools in the talk shifts in our own relationship.
I think this is so amazing because so I read this book. I also went on another adventure with my husband this summer on a boat. And I was reading a book called The Sea Wife because I was like, I'm a sea wife right now. And what she says in the book, and it's fiction, but it's written sort of to be almost like a memoir. But she says when you're on the boat, like it exposes the gaps in your relationship, right? And so on the RV experiment, it exposes the gaps in your relationship. And so I love this because what we did is we did sort of name the pattern, but I like yours better because mine was a little mean. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
Because his dad used to do that to his mom. So I'd be like, oh, you're in the Eric pattern. See, but that triggered him, right? So now I'm going to call it the helpy pattern. But we were playful about it, right? And I think that's a really important thing that you're talking about here is that you can solve relationship problems in a way that is, and I always say like feminine, but it's playful, it's productive. Yeah. It's not in the like, oh my God, you're a fuck up, you're a bad husband, like if you don't solve this problem, blah, 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 right? It became playful. And that's why I actually thought that's what I thought he was joking. I was like, are you joking?
As a recovering sarcastic person, I will make one. This is a very critical point that you just mentioned is sarcastic is not playful.
Yes, this is so good, Krister. Yes.
It may be playful for you, but it's not playful for the other person. And unfortunately, I was raised, I remember when I would do the Bumble, the online dating thing after my divorce. If I ever saw a woman who, and it's more frequent than you think, like people put in their profiles, sarcasm is my language or whatever, I'd be like, I'm running for the hills.
Yes.
Because that is actually the one chapter that I didn't get into the book that I wanted to get is basically the antidote to sarcasm, which admittedly I haven't completely written yet, so I can't say what it is right now. But what I do know is that sarcasm should just be cut out, just cut it out, because it never improves relationship.
It doesn't. And I'm married to a British person, and so I think British people, right? Like it's in their blood. But I really love also the example you shared with your wife, because then it allows her to not take it personally. And I think that's what happens when we get into these patterns, is what you highlighted is so important. It becomes a habit. And then it can turn into resentment. It can turn into low self-worth. We call it like going global, right? Then you could say like, he's always that way. He never does this, right? And it's like every relationship problem that's ever been written about can be fixed by making these small shifts. So first of all, I'm fully going to interview again when your next book comes out, Relationship. But if you were going to give us one more like easy word trade out, like a trade-off, something that we can implement that's a talk shift before we wrap up and everybody runs out to get the book. I'm going to totally watch this video with my husband. I think it'd be so fun. Tell me what that would be. What would be your last sort of like, just try this?
So I think the next one is really around anger, which is tucked into the relationship book. But I think it also the relationship part of the book, which is towards the end. But I think it applies equally in business, because my experience in the CEOs and leaders that I coach is the most common emotion that they experience at work is anger, frustration, and disappointment, which is all just synonyms for anger. And so many psychologists will say that anger is not a primary emotion. It's a secondary emotion, meaning there's always another emotion that's fueling anger. And so whenever we find ourselves angry, someone else angry, whether it's our children, spouses, employees, is we ask ourselves, what is the emotion behind my anger? And it's a multiple choice question. I'm going to get it wrong, but I think there are 4 answers. I'm afraid, I'm embarrassed, which is another word for shame, I'm guilty, or I'm sad.
Yeah, that's great.
I think there may be another one, but the point was I was never somebody who was very in touch with my emotions. So if someone would just ask me, what's the emotion behind my anger? I'd be like, there is no emotion. Well, the reality is like by forcing the question and saying these are the only 4 choices, just pick the one that's closest. Now it starts to say, well, I'm angry because I think I'm afraid. Maybe afraid is too strong of a word. Maybe I'm like anxious, or I'm like, but now I can say, like, if I have a follow-up conversation, if I talk to you about how I'm angry, it puts you on the defensive. It may put you in a state of fear if I'm your boss, or if you're afraid that I'm going to leave the relationship. And now you shut down and we don't really have a conversation about what's creating your fear or the anger. And so now we can have a conversation rather than saying, hey, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm disappointed. It's like, I'm afraid. I'm afraid of what would my life look like if this relationship ended. I'm afraid that even though I'm very comfortable in my relationship with my wife, there's still times when she does something in just literally in the last week that I'm like, there's just this fear that like, oh, what would that look like if we, is she so upset about that she would potentially leave me someday if this continued for the next 3 to 5 years? And there is a moment of fear. And what happens is, initially it bubbles up as anger. Yeah. But I, anytime I feel anger, I say, okay, what's the relation? What's behind it? What's behind it? Okay, I'm afraid or I'm anxious. So let's talk about that emotion. And so that is, I think, is one of the second or third most powerful talk shifts in the book. But I think it's like towards the end of the book. So.
Well, then you just got to read the whole thing. I mean, obviously.
I did want to write a book that was like not yet another one of those books that like just starts to repeat itself after chapter 5. So some of my favorite is actually at the very end of the book. So
I love that. This is all so huge. And I think the other thing I just want to highlight for our listeners is this, like, I think that women who are dating or women who are in relationships have this like mythology that they're going to find a guy who's factory installed with like like perfection, right? Like he'll be emotionally intelligent. So that means he'll just know those 4 things underneath, he'll know the talk shifts, he'll blah, 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 blah. And I think what I hear you saying as a veteran of a failed relationship and someone who's working on a second relationship with a lot more awareness and intention, it takes intention, it takes communication, it takes commitment, right, and engagement and all of these things. And then if you find the guy that's willing to do that with you, right, then you can work through those 69%. Because ladies, if you're looking for the damn perfect guy, he ain't there. So what you're looking for is a guy who will say, hey, let's figure out a way to deal with the helpy or the that doesn't make sense situation, because we all have them in our relationships and we're all human beings trying to find love. So I think this is brilliant work. I'm so excited that I got to have you on my show. I'm honored.
I think there's one line, this gets into one of the chapters I'm actually writing for this next project, the relation shift. So the next project it will be a book, but it's actually going to be, the subtitle is A Moving Marriage Between Music and Spoken Word. And
wow.
I wanted to use music because I think it's a metaphor for how words can move us. Music can move us without touching us, right? And too often our words hurt more. And then there was this thing that came up recently, like, I think partly like what relationships get destroyed in a moment and they get built over years, or, so it's that controlling the things that we say in anger and remaining calm. So much so that there was this moment my wife was triggered just in the past weekend over something. And I know I won't go into the triggers, but I knew that this was something that was a trigger for her. It's not something I did, but it was something that just kind of happened to come into our lives as we were walking on the street. And like an hour later, it was like, literally we had like this, like, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know who this person is who I'm talking to. So much so it was like, and I'm exaggerating here, but I told her, I was like, it was almost as if you were like temporarily insane for 15 minutes of your life.
Right.
But knowing enough about triggers and how, it happens to me too. I have different behaviors, but knowing enough that when we know what our triggers are and what our partner's triggers are, then we can almost be more likely to give them a pass. It was almost like I was waiting for the evening to be ruined. As soon as this thing came in, I was like, oh man, something's going to happen. It's not going to be good. Whenever this ticking time bomb, actually explodes. And it took about 3 hours before it did. But it actually caused me to think of like, sometimes I actually want to talk to a therapist, like who maybe like deals with like, what would it be like to actually be married to someone who you discover later is bipolar or has Tourette's syndrome or whatever, like someone who truly has a diagnosable like condition. We have to like just give them, if we want to continue a relationship, we have to give them a pass for that like 10, 15, 20 minutes when they are having an episode. And I think that sometimes like in relationships, like that is a skill to be able to know when you see the time bomb ticking, which also requires us to have those deeper conversations about like, what are the things that just set us off that other people have done so that we know that, okay, I knew as soon as this thing happened on the street, I knew that the fuse was lit. I didn't know when the fuse was going to go off. Right. I was like, I got to be ready because when this one goes off, it's going to be a good one. And she's going to probably say some things that she doesn't mean to me. And I just need to stay calm and let it go. And not like put my head under the ground. I just won't talk about it in that moment. We talked about it 2 days later when it kind of subsided. And then we got through it. But it wasn't about trying to argue or engage
in the moment.
The moment.
Yeah, I think that's so great. Like when I think about those things, I think of them as like balls of energy, right? Like it's just energy that's happening in the moment. And so I'm sort of like being aware of the energy, like being like not letting the energy like come into me, but just like allowing it and observing it. I always call it participant audience observer. You know what I mean? Like I'm just like in it, but I'm watching it, and I'm watching it from afar, and I'm also in it. And it's really in my 36-foot experiment. It was really powerful because I was like, wow, this is just energy happening, and it's not personal. And we will talk about it. We will talk about it later. And what's really cool about living in 36 feet, and my husband really wants to do it, and so do I. And I was joking with my girlfriend. I was like, he wants it so bad that he's just like any kind of conversation. He'll be like, let's have it. Let's figure it out, right? Because we really both want to do it. No one wants to have a shitty experience. And I just think that's what's so beautiful about this thing that I'm doing is because we said this, like when you're living in a house, if someone's annoying, you can just like, whatever, haha, go in another room, whatever, you know what I mean? You don't have to confront it really. And that's why I'm really excited about my experiment and this conversation we're having and this book that you wrote, because when you love somebody and you're committed and you have trust, then all you need is the space to have those conversations and the wisdom to not have them in the moment. And then you can really create together like more intimacy as a result of this sharing. Like actually what happened is I was sad and scared. And so I really want our listeners to know that like all of this with the right person allows you to create intimacy in the space of conflict or challenge. And you can do that at work as well. You can create more trust. You can create more rapport, and people will be more engaged and more productive because you're actually caring about them. And I think that's why what you're doing is so powerful, because at work, it's no different. People want to be cared about. They want to be acknowledged. They want to be appreciated. All those things you say, like, you know, that people say when they're complaining. So I know you wanted to say one last thing before we wrap it up.
Well, I think it actually relates to I think the other reason why the book crosses over between personal is like some people feel more comfortable practicing in their work life.
Yes. Yeah.
So like if I feel like my marriage or relationship is on the verge of, exploding, I may feel more comfortable practicing these talk shifts at work and then bringing them into my relationship once I feel like I'm like, I'm not doing them wrong. Other people feel the opposite. Like, hey, I feel great in my personal relationship, but my boss or my team or whatever is so that's one of the things is like, I had the opportunity of learning French and German as an adult. And my French teacher I said, how do you learn French quickly? He said, practice it everywhere, at work, at home, on street, everywhere. So it's like really like, that's one of the reasons why crossing over the two. So I have one thing for you to consider with your husband in that 36-foot space.
I love it. This is great. Yes.
So if you actually watch the video book together, like you're literally sitting on the couch, I mean, you can put it on your smart TV, it's on Google TV, Roku, I mean, whatever, or you can just, connect your iPad to the TV. So it's called Talk Shift TV. You can get on talkshift.com. You can actually get the video book. It's an option to add after you buy the book. But the point is when you're sitting there watching the book together, then if there's one of these talk shifts, so you're like, what's your husband's first name? Or Jeremy. If you say, Jeremy, this talk shift number 5, that's one I would really like you to practice more with me. And as you go through, give him an opportunity to pick 2 or 3 that he could say, Marni, this talk shift 15, this is one that I'd like you to work on with me.
I love
and what you'll find is highly likely that the two of you will not choose the same one that you want your partner to work on. And that's how he created the book to be more than just a book. It's really a framework, a system for recovering, or maybe not recovering, I'll just say improving and making better the communication and ultimately the relationship between 2 people at work or at home.
I love it. I'm going to interview you in like 6 months at the most, and then we're going to talk about how I watched it and I transformed everything.
Can we grab Jeremy on the show?
Yeah, we'll have Jeremy on the show. Oh my God, maybe by then he won't be so shy about being on audio.
I think I could live with Marni in 25 feet now after reading the book.
Exactly. Oh my God, that's so funny. But I'm really excited about what you're doing. And I really want ladies to hear, like I always say, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And so really looking at how do you have a more meaningful life? And this is really it. And it takes courage to make some changes. And I know all of you can do it. So Krister, thank you so much for being here today. And ladies, whatever talk shift you make, do it with some damn dignity. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Hey, thanks for tuning into today's show. So if being in an intimate relationship in which you feel 100% seen, heard, and accepted by a high caliber man is a priority for you right now, and you're interested in seeing if you're a fit for working with me and my team at Dating with Dignity, here's what I want you to do. Just head over to DWD VIP, that's D as in dating, W, D as in dating, VIP.com, and book a call to speak with my team. We'll get on the phone with you for about 60 minutes and you'll get crystal clear on what's stopping you from finding true love right now. We'll also take a look at what you want to create, what you want your whole life to look like when you're able to finally be fully expressed as a woman in a healthy relationship with an incredible guy. And if we can help you get from where you are right now to where you want to be, we will show you the fastest path possible that makes sense for you to do that. We help smart, successful women all over the world solve this one missing piece in their life so they can finally have it all. So to see if we can help you do the same thing, head over to DWDVIP.com. I'm Marni Battista, and let's talk soon.